Tori Linder has made it her mission to bring attention to the protection of our world's last wild places as a conservationist and media producer. So currently she serves as co-founder and managing director of the Path of the Panther project. This is supported by National Geographic Society. Path of the Panther is inspiring protection of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, a statewide connected network of private and public lands spanning 18 million acres. Let's bring Tori in live with us right now. Hey, Tori, how you doing?
Hi, Joe. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you as always. It's been a while since we've been, well, face-to-face and face-to-face on camera as well. So it is really good to see you. And it's exciting to see what's happening with the Wildlife Corridor project. It's what a massive undertaking, but so important to have that corridor where animals can move through that space.
Yeah, it's great to be here again with you and able to really share some incredible successes that we've had in the last 12 months.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to disappear myself backstage. You can take over for a bit, and then we'll have a little Q&A to wrap things up.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to work on sharing my screen here. Oh, okay. I think Joe is helping me out there. So hello, everyone. As Joe mentioned, my name is Tori Linder, and I am a full-time conservationist. Similar to Asher, I work to advocate for the wildlands and wildlife of our planet. One second, I'm having a little bit of a screen issue here, so I'm going to see. Okay, I think I'm going to move to here. So today I'm going to tell you a bit about my personal journey in conservation.
Sorry, Tori, I just want to jump in. Is it not staying full screen for you?
It was not. I can try to go back if this is a problem. Can I leave it how it is?
Yeah, I mean, if you're okay with it like that, we can still see the pictures nice and big. It's taking up most of the screen. So
okay, perfect. I'm just gonna right here. Let's see if it'll continue to flip full screen. Just let me know if there's a problem, Joe. So to jump back into the presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit today about who I am as a conservationist and storyteller, and also what we're working to achieve here in Florida. So personally, I started my career working in sub-Saharan Africa. I had the incredible opportunity to work in both Kenya and South Africa with pastoral communities that were facing really incredible challenges on their landscapes due in part to a changing climate, but also other challenges that we address here in Florida, like habitat fragmentation. And it was through this process that I came to really realize the beauty of my own home, my own landscape of Florida. And my family has been in Florida since the mid-1800s. We've been ranching in this state for 5 generations. I had the great fortune of growing up enjoying many of our wild places, like this captivating image from the Everglades headwaters. And I will add, from here on out, the photos shared in this presentation are by my colleague Carlton Ward Jr., who's an incredible National Geographic photographer and conservationist. So my home state of Florida is exceptionally unique. We're a peninsula located on the southeastern tip of the United States with nearly 8,500 miles of shoreline, the highest concentration of freshwater springs in the entire world, iconic wildlife like the Florida black bear and the Florida manatee. And we're also home to the Florida Everglades, a slow-moving river of grass unlike any other in the world. It's for all of these reasons that Florida is so beloved. Today, we are the 3rd most populous state in the country, and we gain nearly 1,000 residents a day. As we work to make room for those new residents, we're also developing at a staggering rate. In some years, we're losing an average of 20 acres an hour to development. This is a photo of a community in Southwest Florida and what was once a healthy and thriving timberland. Habitat loss from exploitation of resources and urbanization is the single largest factor contributing to the loss of biodiversity globally. The consequence of habitat fragmentation is that our protected lands become islands separated by development, which means they can't maintain populations into the future. So in 2010, scientists came together to take a baseline study of current development in Florida, and they projected this in the future if our rates were to continue. And this was the projection. This is our Florida 2070 report, which shows a pretty bleak reality for our state. If you can see, most of these green areas that are protected today become, like I just mentioned, islands separated by development. We have an incredible legacy of conservation in this state. We are nearly 27% protected, and that's thanks in large part to the public lands we have in South Florida. We have 4 million acres of contiguous public lands, conservation efforts that have been led over the last 100 years to protect iconic landscapes like Everglades National Park, like Big Cypress Preserve, or Picayune State Forest. So this was the alternative that was presented. The notion of protecting a wildlife corridor through the center of our state that linked these currently protected lands with remaining opportunity areas to ensure that wide-ranging species like a Florida black bear or a Florida panther had an opportunity to continue thriving into the future. This is an 18 million acre network of lands spanning from Florida Bay in the south to the Georgia and Alabama borders. And today we're looking at about 10 million acres protected and 8 million still requiring some level of conservation status. And so to give you a little bit of context as to why that's so important, I'm sharing here a photo that shows our watersheds in Florida. And so we just highlighted the many benefits of protecting wildlife corridors for wildlife, for critters, for animals, but these corridors are also for people. In protecting the Florida Wildlife Corridor, we're protecting the primary watersheds that ensure we, those of us living in our coastal cities, can continue to thrive for generations. The Greater Everglades ecosystem and watershed, which actually starts just south of Orlando at Walt Disney World and flows all the way south to Florida Bay, provides drinking water for 8 million people. If we pave over the Everglades headwaters, we lose that precious resource. So something incredible happened about 4.5 years ago that proved this science in action and presented a story that potentially had the opportunity to inspire not just our state policymakers, but leaders across the globe as to the importance of landscape connectivity. So this is the Caloosahatchee River, which is located in Southwest Florida on the western side of Lake Okeechobee. As you can see, it doesn't necessarily look like a natural river as one would expect with bends and breaks. That's unfortunately because the Caloosahatchee was a product of the diking and ditching that occurred in the mid-1900s here in Florida as early land developers attempted to drain the Everglades. And that is why today the Greater Everglades ecosystem is touted as the world's largest restoration program. But the reason why I'm showing you this photo of the Caloosahatchee River is because it had been the northernmost boundary for the recovery of our state animal, the Florida panther. And in 2016, the first female panther was found north of the Caloosahatchee River for the first time since the 1970s. This marked an incredible milestone in a truly remarkable recovery story. The Florida panther had reached a historic low of less than 30 individuals in the 1970s. Today, we have somewhere over 200 adult panthers living across the state of Florida, but primarily in Southwest Florida, south of the Caloosahatchee River. And this female panther showed us that by connecting and protecting habitats, these species could continue to move north and make a full recovery with 3 unique populations. So our team went to work telling the story of the Florida panther. Here I am with my colleague Malia Burtis, deep in Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge on a very warm July day. We were wading through the Fakahatchee Strand to service a camera trap system that my colleague Carlton Ward Jr. had set up, and just a little bit of an anecdote to share the blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into this project. As we were out there, a tropical storm hit, and we spent the next couple of hours dodging falling branches, lightning, and torrential downpour. We had certainly underestimated the scale of the weather report. But the reason why we had to set up camera trap systems to capture the Florida panther was because it's remarkably rare and elusive. It's not like a lion or a cheetah, or in some cases a leopard, where you can simply just send a photographer out into the field, out into the landscape, and capture an image. Pumas are very rarely seen in general, but especially so in the greater Everglades ecosystem, and that's why they've survived here. The Florida panther is the last remnant of the eastern cougar, which used to roam all the way across the United States. And so for the last 4 years, our team's been working diligently to capture never-before-seen images of this species, but also the challenges its landscape is facing. The leading cause of death currently for the Florida panther is vehicle collision. This is a harsh reality, but we lose on average 20 to 30 panthers a year as they try to cross roads and make it to other protected lands, or in some cases working lands like cattle ranches and citrus groves. And this is a panther that unfortunately had to be taken from the wild because it had started preying on pets in a subdivision directly adjacent to a natural protected area. And this is also a story of hope. This is a male panther crossing under a wildlife crossing on I-75. And just to explain, when we talk about wildlife corridors, we're talking about the protection of connected networks of lands. When we talk about wildlife crossings, we're talking about these underpasses or overpasses that allow wildlife to move around roads without having to be in direct contact with cars. And these work really well due in part typically to a network of fencing that sort of funnels animals to this central connection point. And here you can also see that this is another panther moving under I-75 as a semi moves above. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these species are moving onto other protected areas, but more often than not, they're actually using the network of existing undeveloped working lands that we have here in the state of Florida. We have a remarkable legacy of agriculture in our state. We're home to America's first cowboys. Floridians have been ranching for nearly 500 years, and the Seminole tribe was known historically as the cow keepers. Today, working cattle ranches on native rangelands, savannas, and prairies are typically managed in a way that allows compatible land use. So this is a bobcat moving from Big Cypress National Preserve onto a private cattle ranch in the Everglades. And it is these lands that our team has been advocating for the protection of from development under specifically a mechanism called a conservation easement, whereby farmers and ranchers get to continue with their way of life and their business, but we ensure into the future that these lands stay green by acquiring fair development rights. And that's massively beneficial, not just for our wildlife and our water and all of these ecosystem services, but also for our economy. Agriculture is the second leading driver of Florida's economy. And here we have a photo of a citrus grove in Southwest Florida that has provided vital connectivity for Florida Panthers. And so as we wrap up, and I'm trying to keep my remarks short today because I know we're a little bit over time, but we have so much hope here in Florida. Last year, we took the story of the Florida Panther and the story of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, the people who make up this landscape, the farmers, the fishermen, the ranchers, to Tallahassee, our state capital, and we shared this story with policymakers. And the result was pretty incredible. We're thrilled to share that the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act passed the State House and State Senate with bipartisan unanimous support. But we're just at the beginning of this journey. The conservation movement here in Florida truly needs all hands on deck. We had nearly $400 million committed to land conservation in our state next year, and that needs to be repeated again and again and again to ensure that these critical linkages are protected for generations to come. For species like the Florida black bear or the Florida panther, but also for young women like Morgan Yates from the Seminole tribe who can continue honoring her family's culture and tradition. So I know I'm talking to folks all over the world today, and if I could leave you with one parting piece of encouragement, it's really to take a moment to reflect on what you can do in your own backyard. To be honest, I never expected to be back in my home state of Florida working in conservation, but I am so glad that I am. The issues we're facing here are most certainly not unique. And each and every one of us has a role to play in finding the solutions local to us. Okay, so I think I should be rejoined. There we go. Hi, Joe. Okay.
There we go. Hey, Tori.
Hi.
Wow. Thank you for that story. Thank you for those images, the background information. I mean, 1,000 people per day moving to the state. I think you mentioned 20 acres per hour, in some cases disappearing. That is such an overwhelming challenge. I mean, Florida's a big state, but it's still space limited. So, wow, those numbers are just startling. But the work you've been able to do, the light you've been able to shed on the wildlife corridor, the importance of it, the buy-in you've gotten from the community, it's really exciting. So that leads to the first question: communication with the public through images, through video, has been so important to like an important driver of the project. How have you found that's worked to kind of change minds, change hearts, win people over to the project?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting point that I think Asher hit on really, really well, that sometimes these concepts are difficult for us to understand due to their size and their scale. And when you boil it down to the story of an individual panther or a population of wildlife, it's easier to understand why this connectivity, why these connections are so important for the future of our communities. That's been a really fascinating part of this process to ideate and think about how we boil down these concepts in collaboration with a network of scientists and map makers and landowners across the state. It's also, been a really fascinating part of the journey to allow the people or promote the people who call this landscape home, telling their own story and providing them the opportunity to do that. I think that's where we've seen our greatest successes and wins in this process.
All right. Well, you show that image kind of moving through to check camera traps. And I can remember an event we did in the past with classrooms in Carleton where he was standing in like water up kind of close to his waist, and he was talking about the challenges and such. So is that the most challenging part of your job, making your way through that environment, or is there something else that's even more challenging?
Well, so interestingly enough, just after this call, I have my bag packed and a change of clothes because I'm going to be dashing out to the Everglades to join our foam team and probably be waist deep in water again. I have to say, I think that's actually the best part of the job. Those are the days that make it all worth it, when we get to be deep in the heart of these protected areas and reminded of how incredible and how resilient our natural environment is. There's a rather infamous saying about the Florida Everglades from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who's a famed conservationist and certainly someone I've spent my entire career looking up to, as well as Dr. Sylvia Earle. But Marjorie said, if we can save the Everglades, we can save the world. And I find that quote very interesting because she was not necessarily pointing to the complexities of restoring the ecosystem, right? She was rather pointing to the complexities of dealing with the landscape, the network of partners and private interest and different communities across the landscape. And so, kind of echoing her sentiment, I think at times what I find most challenging, but also most exciting about this work is presenting a vision of a sustainable future and rallying people from really diverse perspectives and walks of life around it.
Yeah. And do you find, you mentioned being in the field and how that's the best part by far. Do you find with this leadership role, you're being pulled more away from the field to other aspects of the project?
Most certainly. I definitely enjoy my field days, but we have an incredible team who is running our field program full time. My colleague Carlton and I are spending a little too much time on Zoom and in partner meetings or directly advocating for these wild places. But by the same token, it's just the next chapter in all of this. And to take a project from inception and production and time in the landscape through to post-production, and then the ability to devote your time to really sharing it with the world and getting it out there, even in a moment as crazy as the pandemic. It's been incredible to see, and I'm excited for future campaigns. And for that matter, I'm excited to launch the Path of the Panther campaign with the public this year and begin sharing the story of the Florida Panther really globally. There was an article that came out in National Geographic last year. But we also have a feature documentary coming out in 2022. So stay posted.
All right, very cool. I'm going to share a link here to the website. Of course, you can search it on Google, but there is a little bit.
Actually, just search us at pathofthepanther.com.
Perfect. Okay. We have a question here coming via our chat. So we have a scientist here, maybe Lily, and she's wondering, as a scientist, any advice for starting to move more into communication, more into science communication?
That's a really great question. And I, full disclosure, am not a scientist. I kind of have the privilege of working in that medium space, of working with a lot of scientists and a lot of storytellers and marketing experts and translating concepts and back in between. I think the greatest recommendation I would have is to network and get to know people in the creative space. I spend a lot of time intentionally kind of stepping out of the traditional zone of conservation, so to speak, to talk with creatives, whether it be artists doing incredible work, like Asher, for example, or filmmakers in completely different fields, to really get their perspective on how they're telling stories. Also, please reach out to us at pathofthepanther.com. Would love to help connect you to a lot of great organizations who are doing incredible work in that space.
All right, perfect. Well, I think that leads us to one more thing for today, before we let you get out into the swamp, out into the field, which I'm sure you're excited to do. I do want to make sure that we share your handles here as well. If anybody does want to follow around on Twitter, on Instagram. And so, a big thing that's come up today is inspiration. So, you mentioned some inspiration from people like Sylvia Earle, who inspired you growing up. So I'm wondering, for future scientists, people thinking about a career in conservation or media, impact media, what advice would you give someone who's looking to kind of get into that conservation world?
That one's pretty simple. I had a former colleague, Peter Seligman, tell me years ago when I first started in conservation to go for it all in and stick with it. I replay that phrase in my head more times than I choose to admit during the week, because this isn't necessarily the easiest industry to be in. But there's never been a greater time, frankly, to be pursuing this work. It is our generation, it is the decades before us that will decide the future of our planet. And we each have a role and a responsibility to ensure it's a sustainable one.
All right. Well, I know that, every day is probably different. There's the good times, there's the good days, the bad days, but it sounds to me like the victories are slowly starting to pile up. 10 million acres protected already, and with 8 million to go. I have no doubt that you and your team, I've had the privilege of hosting a few members of the team in the past, are going to get there. It's great work. Thank you so much for joining us to share it today, and hope you have a great weekend in the field.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thanks so much, Tori. We'll see you next time.
Bye.